Hi, I'm Leanpub from Leanpub, and in this episode of the Front Matter podcast, I'll be interviewing Pete Zerger. Based in Texas, Pete is a cybersecurity strategist and a chief information security officer for a regional bank in the United States. Pete is a popular speaker and author and a prolific content developer who has created many courses to help professionals in cybersecurity or people completely new to the topic improve their skills and pass very demanding professional certification exams. You can follow him on Twitter at pzerger and check out his website at insidethemicrosoftcloud.com. Follow him on LinkedIn and check out his popular YouTube series channel, study series channel, Inside Cloud and Security. Pete is the author of the Leanpub book, CISSP, The Last Mile. In the book, Pete covers every topic in the latest CISSP exam syllabus, organized in a format that makes it easy to drill down on specific exam domains and concepts at a glance, making it an essential exam resource for anyone who aims to prepare for the exam without wasting time or money. And just to get it out of the way, CISSP stands for Certified Information Systems Security Professional, and the work required to qualify it is so huge that the qualification requires not just learning a ton of information, but also learning how to learn a ton of information with the best amount of effort and the best amount of time. In this interview, we're going to talk about Pete's background and career. We're going to talk about his book and what the CISSP exam is. And at the end, we'll talk a little bit about his experience as a content creator and book author. So thank you very much, Pete, for being on the Leanpub Front Matter podcast.
Absolutely. My pleasure, Len.
I always like to start these interviews by asking people for their origin story. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about where you grew up and how you found your way into a career, both in cybersecurity and in training and also a third in content creation.
Absolutely. So I have lived in all of the least exciting states in the United States, if you ask most people. Born in Missouri, spent some time in Nebraska, spent some time in Kansas. Wasn't born in Texas, but got here as fast as I could. So I made it to Texas by way of Oklahoma, where I spent the first 20 or so years of my IT career. And then I was a bit late to the game when it came to IT. I actually spent some time in the satellite television industry for a bit. I worked my way through my early 20s in the telemarketing industry back when that was actually a thing. So I didn't actually come to technology until 27 years old, give or take.
Okay.
And I spent a good decade really there just working my way through the corporate structure. And one day somebody invited me to come speak at a user group meeting, I'd guess around 2000 to 2001. And it really all just kind of took off from there. I went from user groups in the 2000s to my first major conference with Microsoft in 2007 or 8. And before I knew it, I was on the road to Australia and Asia every year speaking at regional conferences. I've been to the EU a few times. And content development really was kind of an outcropping of that speaking line of work. So, when you go and speak at a conference that's large enough, you invariably bump into folks at Microsoft or some other vendor. And so I spent a few years as a consultant, but as a significant sideline, developing content and, not just learning content, but exam content for organizations like Microsoft, which then led to, colleagues through one program or another asking me to write books with them. I've been in the Microsoft MVP program, the most valuable professional group, for 18, 19 years now. So just a lot of long-time relationships there. So it's just been kind of a long, slow growth curve here, I guess. And back when cloud became a thing back around 2010, I decided to pivot to cloud and then into security as a natural outcropping of that. So I've been more or less security focused here for a good 10, 12 years now.
Yeah, that's Yeah. No, that's a really great story. What sort of version of I'm going to ask you one version of a question that comes up on this podcast from time to time. People's careers are so winding, I can include myself in that category. Do you wish you'd studied computer science in university and just gone straight into what you're doing?
So I don't. I did go back to school in my 30s and finished a degree in computer science, which today just doesn't matter at all.
Okay.
Now, back in my initial, junior college experience, when you're learning Pascal, you can imagine the applicability of Pascal in today's world isn't great. So it wasn't a terrible thing that I actually came back to a degree a little later in life, and that was really more around management topics when it came to security. So not such a bad path in that respect, because we've seen so much advancement in computer science that anything I might have done in the 90s would be all but irrelevant today. And for anybody in our line of work today, I mean, you've developed a publishing platform. Your experience probably means a lot more to you than your education at this point, right?
Oh yeah, in lots of ways. Yeah, I mean, my sort of take on college is that, like, if you have the chance to spend 4 years in your youth, and you can afford the money and the time,
Yeah.
with around a whole huge group of strangers who are also young and like you, spending 4 years studying something on a campus. I mean, that's a great experience. It's a ticket to the world where, like, you're not afraid, you're not intimidated by doctors because you remember what they were like at parties when they were 18 and you're friends with them, things like that. So that's if you can afford the time and the money, there's actually these huge benefits besides what you're actually going to be kind of using day to day in your career down the line.
Oh, absolutely. And I had a strange hybrid experience in that I started in IT in March of '97. And I pretty quickly wanted to get certified. Microsoft had a Microsoft system engineer cert back then. And our local junior college had their very first MCSE training class where you could come take a half semester course. And so in that first course, I met senior network engineers. I met a CIO. I met a lawyer. The people that were there are not the people that are there today. So I made some really interesting friends there, and wound up, getting years of mentoring from a CIO who was a brilliant technical mind, but knew a lot about the business side of things as well. So it wound up being a happy accident, and that led to my becoming an adjunct professor for that junior college sometime later. So I spent that, and that's really in the late 90s, early 2000s, where my content development, my teaching came about when I had that gig at the university.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I mean, it sort of reminds me of the old adage that, if you really want to learn something, teach it. And it's that challenge that really sort of forces you to understand a topic, and because you have to not only learn it, but learn how to convey it to people who haven't learned it.
100%. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I'm just curious about sort of the detail of so you were in IT for a while, and then you sort of when cloud came out in 2010, you sort of switched to cloud, and you switched to security. What was the first thing, like, job you undertook in the security space, if you can recall?
Wow. So in the security space, it really started with endpoint security, just attaching our systems to the cloud and help. And then, we went from just pure endpoint security into hybrid, because, these days now hybrid cloud is still a really popular model. So helping organizations attach their on-premises environment to the public cloud. And I really spent just years in that hybrid cloud area dealing with endpoint security and then into identity security. And it's really just kind of blossomed from there. And now we're just in this continuous cycle of every couple of years onboarding that new technology, whatever that might be.
So just for people listening who might not know, the hybrid kind of cloud, I think, that you're talking about, and please correct me if I'm wrong about this, but conventionally in the past, prior to the cloud years, companies had their own, basically, servers. They had their own computing, more or less. And then when you switch to cloud, you're now relying on some other company to provide you with computing. And then hybrid would be using both.
So hybrid, so in hybrid cloud, what we're actually doing is connecting the public cloud to our own data center using a site-to-site VPN.
Okay.
And so then you have this now added complexity. It gives an organization a lot of control, because you'll have some specialized, systems and applications that maybe have to be in a legacy configuration. So you get a lot of control in your own data center. But then as you're developing new applications and tech, you can put those over into a public cloud.
I understand. Okay. Okay. So in this model, you're typically keeping your data center to yourself, but it's the applications and things like that that are being run in the cloud.
Right, right. Because at the end of the day, if every organization could push a button and be purely public cloud overnight, many of them would love to do that because they'd get out of the data center business. They're not worried about facilities and hardware and all the people it takes to run that. It's a lot of complexity, a lot of expense. But most organizations today are still in some sort of hybrid scenario where they've got some core infrastructure that it's just easier and cheaper and better to keep on prem, and they'll run what they can in the cloud where it makes financial sense to tap into the scale and security that you get just being on one of those big platforms, Azure, AWS, Google Cloud Platform.
You've mentioned a couple of key terms already that I think would probably be good for us to explore a little bit. One is identity and one is endpoint. So can you talk a little bit? You mentioned, I think, endpoint first. So can you talk for a moment just for people who might not know what an endpoint is in the world of computer security?
Yeah, so we're really talking about any device you would use to access your company's information. So that could be phones, it could be tablets, it could be a desktop, a laptop. So really just securing anything an end user is going to leverage to do their day-to-day work, really.
Or I suppose in the Internet of Things days, it could be like a toaster or a printer or something like that as well.
It could be just about anything. That's a fact. We do still have security we have to worry about around networked printers and copiers. And, I invited a penetration tester to do what we call a full knowledge penetration test, where we put them on our trusted network and said, we know we're secure from outside. We want to bring you inside and see what you can do. And they were trying to hack everything down to copiers and printers. And the one thing they managed to do was to change the time on the display of our time clock.
Right.
So everything in context has connectivity for something. So yeah, endpoint is definitely a squishy term when you think about what's out there.
And identity then is that the user?
Yeah, we're really talking about the user account. So, whether that's your corporate logon, your social identities, or some combination thereof. Yeah.
Yeah. And the challenges there are around, I was just listening to I think a video you did on YouTube, and you talk about how, it's very different if I'm in my office where I had to use a security card to get in, and I'm using a laptop that's sort of bounded by, only my coworkers and only coworkers allowed in this spot, as opposed to, at the airport, or I'm in a coffee shop, or I'm on vacation or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. So zero trust is the common security strategy today, which means we trust nothing and we verify everything. So we have really in the cloud, you have what we'd call policy-based security. So we have policies that kind of define the rules for how the identity platform will behave. So if Len comes into my office, he's on the trusted network where we validated that the device is managed and it's currently compliant with our policies before we let it onto the network. I'm not going to prompt Len for multiple factors all day long because the risk is very, very low. But if you're out and about, you're on a laptop, maybe you're out on an island on vacation, now I'm a little less trusting. We're going to maybe hit you with a second factor of authentication. So give me your password, but I'm going to send you a prompt on your authenticator app on your phone to make sure that we're good. And if we see enough variance in your behavior, the AI, in the identity system might raise the risk level and say, okay, Len's at medium risk level today. So we're going to make sure we prompt him every time he tries to log in these circumstances, and maybe multiple times, just to make sure that we keep that high level of assurance that we know who we're dealing with. So yeah, it's so as you see from that video, we've moved into a world where everybody could be a specialist in a number of things, identity security, endpoint security, application security, and it's a lot for folks. And so really where I've evolved is, having been in this for many years now, I'm really focusing on making those concepts accessible to people who are coming up in the cybersecurity industry or trying to take that next step with an exam like the CISSP.
Yeah, and just before we move on to talking about that, because that's so interesting to understand that, and which I don't, the point in your career where you required, or where this is the next step, and just understanding and what that means for your career when you've passed it. But just before that, just to give a little bit of color, I mean, we're talking about cybersecurity, which is actually kind of like they make movies about that. It's kind of a thrilling thing. And I've had some, I mean, I'm sort of the resident kind of first touch point for security stuff at Leanpub because I kind of watch everything. And so I've got some kind of, on the ground experience with the kind of, our level of being protective. And there's one term that you used in the video or else in something I read, threat hunting, which is kind of a cool term. And I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about what threat hunting is.
Yeah. So before we do that, you mentioned they make movies about that. So I'm going to share a movie story. So I entered the Microsoft MVP program back in the late 2000s. I wanted to say 2006, 2007, with a particular monitoring product for monitoring networks and applications and making sure that they're online and secure and so forth. And the name of the product isn't so important, but in that same year, a movie came out called Firewall starring Harrison Ford. And the only thing that any of us remembered about that movie in my little social group was when Harrison Ford was in the Security Operations Center, they threw up a dashboard, and it was the product that we were all specialists in within this Microsoft program. So we all just kind of lost our minds.
Wow.
Our little monitoring tool made its way into this film. It was pretty exciting.
That's amazing.
So threat hunting. Yeah. So when you think about threats in the world, whether those are attackers out there that are trying to initiate ransomware attacks, or the phishing emails we hear about where they can steal your credentials, or just malware that you run into in miscellaneous forms. With threat hunting, we're either manually or through automated tools trying to identify threats in our environment that may be attempting to enter our environment or maybe already there. So that's sort of an operational activity that just goes on all the time, where we're monitoring for threats day to day. What we do before we even get to that point is we go through a process we call threat modeling, where we actually look at the services that we're delivering for the business, and we map out, how does that customer that's using our banking system get to their sensitive data, and we map out all of the interfaces and how the data flows through that system to identify where the attackers are going to come after our systems. And so through that threat modeling, it shows us where the attack surface that we need to secure, and gives us some idea of how we can most effectively go about that threat hunting to make sure that we don't have any bad actors inside our four walls or inside our cloud, as it were.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Just to give an example to people listening, you might be wondering how can kind of small businesses be concerned about kind of like, security things and stuff like that. And I'm just saying this based on like hearsay and things like that. But one thing that people like, one skill that some thieves have is stealing credit card numbers. Mm-hmm. Stealing credit card numbers is very difficult, I imagine. Stealing large numbers of credit card numbers, I imagine, is very difficult. Very different skill from using them to do to sort of try and get money out of them or something like that, right? And so, right. And being able to use them to get money out of them is also a very different skill from putting those two people together. And those three things are a different skill from validating. Mm-hmm. If I'm the middleman, mm-hmm. I won't want to sell something to the person who's going to use it unless I'm pretty sure that it's not all garbage. So then I have to find someone else with the skill to test to see how good that list is. All four of those people, even if you're just running a humble e-commerce site, can be trying to use you in some way. And so this is the kind of thing that you always like, just to give some color to it, like the kind of challenges that these things involve. Like the people out there are very creative, the bad actors. And you've got to worry about them getting inside, not just, and then there's the kind that want to get inside your organization, which is a whole other category of thing. And that idea of modeling those different points and like sort of missions, I suppose, that people might be trying to achieve by exploiting you is a really good process.
Yeah, and to that end, what the cloud has really brought us these days is the ability to outsource some of that. So if you're a small e-commerce company, you might outsource your payments to somebody like a Stripe or a PayPal. So you've got an API there, and you're no longer in the business of actually processing credit cards. And for the login, everybody has Facebook or a Gmail or a Microsoft account or a Twitter account. So you might outsource your identity by allowing users to access your service with their preferred social identity. So you just kind of peel off those risks, transfer those risks to some other function. So like in your case, you can focus on building your publishing platform and not be in the business of building an identity provider platform, and not be in the business of building secure credit card processing, because those are just not core to your mission.
Oh, no way. I mean, if it weren't for services like Stripe and PayPal and stuff like that, which have dramatically improved in my limited experience. So, but it's been over 10 years now. The situation is dramatically improved for, online vendors and, small e-commerce companies and stuff like that, because of the protections that those big giant companies can provide for you.
Oh, exactly. Yeah. Even in the limited amount of software that I've been involved in building, if we couldn't transfer that identity management risk to that big, cloud identity platform, if we couldn't send that credit card processing over to a qualified third party, there'd just be no way.
Yeah. Yeah. Now moving on to your book and the CISSP exam. So, if you could maybe paint a little bit of a picture, I mean, maybe even your own, at what point are you in your career where do you decide to take the CISSP as a kind of like ambitious thing to do? Or is it the kind of thing where like a boss is like, you've got to pass this exam if you want to like not be fired by the end of next year?
So it was something I've been self-employed for a long time, maybe, good gosh, nearly 20 years now. For most of the last 20 years. And so somewhere, I don't know, 7-8 years ago, I was at a point where I was doing a bit more cybersecurity strategy. I was advising customers on their strategic approach in their business. And the CISSP exam is branded as an exam for security leaders. And so not only as an exam for security leaders, but if you look at the most requested certification on job listings in the world of security, CISSP and Security Plus are the top two. And so knowing that it was an exam that many employers recognized, I said, okay, that's the exam I'm going to go after. And I set a goal for myself. There, folks will spend varying amounts of time to prepare for an exam like that. I had been in the business of security for quite a while, so most folks, I think, would tell you they probably spend somewhere between 3 and 12 months. I spent 14 days. I had a couple of weeks where I was light. I said, I'm going to set a plan, and having developed, not only learning content, but having written questions for exams, I know a lot about how to learn quickly. So I just established a strategy for myself that I knew worked. And I spent a couple of weeks just knocking out everything I needed to prepare for that exam, and went in and bam, on the first try, 250 questions in 3 hours. It was certainly not a lightweight exam. And today it's not the same exam. It's computer adaptive, as are most exams. So you can get out of that exam with 100 questions today, though it's grueling in its own right. But it was purely something aspirational that I wanted to do that I felt would serve, not only just testing my level of knowledge, but giving me a credential that was meaningful to the organizations that I'd be serving.
Okay. And so most of the people who you encounter who are taking your courses or watching your videos and who contact you and stuff like that, are they in a similar situation where they're kind of independent and they just want to learn these skills and have this qualification, or are they within an organization? What would you say the kind of proportion is?
There is absolutely no normal. So on my YouTube channel, I have learners from 50 countries, and they watch in the thousands of hours of videos every day. And really what led me to developing content on YouTube really started with COVID, because I had been traveling, across continents to 3 major conferences a year or so speaking. And when COVID hit, there was no traveling anymore, right? So I thought, okay, I can reach a decent audience right out of the gate by going to YouTube. So I did that, and pretty quickly found that things had grown to a point that I could reach more people in a day than I had reached in the last 5 years. And now I reach more people in a day than I've ever spoken to in 15 years, 20 years of public speaking.
Yeah, it's really amazing, actually, just to give people a sense of the scale here. One of this video I was talking about before that I was watching, it's a 7-hour long video, which has nearly 1.2 million views now. This is, in my experience, very rare on YouTube. It's just not the normal model. Everybody thinks kind of like 30 seconds, 10 minutes kind of thing. But like this content is so valuable to people. Passing this exam changes your life, changes your professional life. It changes where you can get hired. It changes how much money you can make. It might change where you live, things like that. And it's just an incredible achievement. And actually, I'm curious in talking to you about what that journey was like in the last part of the interview, where we talk about your experience as a very successful content creator and author and things like that. But just before we do that, to give people a little bit of a sense of the kinds of things that are in the exam. One thing I was very interested to see was a little section on post-quantum computing security.
Oh yeah,
and things like that. So could you talk a little bit about post-quantum cryptography?
Yeah, absolutely. So the thing about all of these, CISSP and many of these security exams is they're updated pretty frequently. So the CISSP goes through a renewal, a refresh from their provider, which is ISC², every 3 years. And so quantum is one of those advancing topics. So when we're thinking about post-quantum cryptography, what we're talking about there are cryptographic algorithms you would use to encrypt data on conventional computers that are secure against quantum computers when they come about. So how can I protect my data with the algorithms that exist today for that day that a quantum computer pops up and a bad actor is basically using that massive compute power to come after me? And so we talk in post-quantum about which types of algorithms are susceptible, because you have algorithms in the symmetric family that are used to bulk encrypt data, and then we have asymmetric algorithms which use key pairs to allow us to sign messages and share keys securely. We talk about Shor's algorithm and Grover's algorithm, which are algorithms that to varying degrees allow bad actors to more quickly, crack the code on algorithms in the post-quantum world. And today, it's funny you pick that one thing out, that one topic out, because there's really not a lot for anybody to talk about there. We're really moving quickly in this world of quantum, where we're not far off from a workable quantum computer, where the algorithms we use to encrypt data will all have to change. And to that end, I expect 2 or 3 years from now, when ISC² updates that exam, we'll be talking about the next generation of encryption algorithms, which have been selected but haven't yet been implemented. And so at the end of the day, when you take an exam like the CISSP, you have a yearly requirement. So not only is it a very demanding exam, to your point, but every year the candidates that maintain that certification have to go out and take dozens of hours of continuing professional education. So something along the lines of 30 hours a year they have to take to maintain. So just keeping that up, if you can imagine that, I think I've been a CISSP since around 2016, give or take. And so I've gone through 30 hours or better of my own every year, just trying to keep skills up. And so that's a big commitment for folks that are jumping in.
And actually, for the sort of snake to eat its own tail here, but like learning that is actually part of the exam, and it's called due diligence, right? If I got that correctly, that you need to actually you have a responsibility to actually actively maintain your knowledge and understanding of these things, so that you can engage in something called due care.
There you go. Yeah. So that's more or less true. That's funny. So those are really challenging concepts for people on the exam. That's a pretty common question I get. Folks want to talk about how due diligence and due care are related and how they can spot them. But yeah, that's a pretty good analogy.
Okay.
Yeah, you have to go through those two steps, and to your question about the audience, I would say I've had CISSP exam candidates as young as university, so late teens, early 20s. I'd say early 20s for the most part, because you have to have 5 years of security-related work experience to hold that certification, but you can still pass the exam, and they will make you an associate of ISC squared. So I've had some folks in university that use my material to pass that exam long before they have the work experience. But I also have learners that might be well into their 50s or even 60s. And not on this exam, but on another more junior level exam. I just had my youngest learner, for the Security Plus exam, which is more of an entry level exam, I had a learner who's 18 years old that just passed with no experience at all. And I had my oldest learner who reached out, who was 73 and taking his first cybersecurity exam.
Wow.
And candidly shared, he said at my age, my memory's not as good, but the way you broke this material down to make it easy for me to understand, he said, I learned what I needed for this exam in 2 months of walking my dog. So very gratifying to hear, because that's really what my business is about, is not teaching this, people this technology, but really finding a way to break it down so they can understand it more readily and onboard it more quickly, because we all have limited information flows so quickly in this life, and life is so busy. We all have better things to do than study for exams. So I don't try to get folks across the finish line. I try to get them across the finish line faster.
Yeah, that's really interesting. That's a very important component of your video, and you very deliberately at the beginning talk about the process that you should use for internalizing this material, and concepts like repetition, which might seem obvious, but there's techniques that you can deploy. There's sort of graphs you can use to show like types of retention and how much you retain over time and things like that. There's batching, other kinds of concepts like that. But when it comes, it's interesting. This, and I have an interest in selling your book. But one thing when I was preparing for this interview, I realized was that if you're not worried about an exam at the end, mm-hmm. It's very entertaining, actually. Because I should say very entertaining. It's just very informative. You learn about the structure and the workings of this technology that's all around us very well from the book. So even if you're not taking the exam, if you just want to understand more about how your computer works and things like that, coming into the subject through the concerns and interests of the security space is actually just a really interesting perspective to see.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because I try to make everything interesting but relatable in a real world way, because at the end of the day, if you're a security leader, you're not responsible for being able to cite concepts through rote memorization. You have to apply those concepts in real world scenarios. So I try to bring examples or even analogies to help folks who've never touched, because the fact of the matter is this exam is a mile wide and not so deep, but you have to have a broad range of technical knowledge, and nobody has touched all of these things. And so over the years of developing learning content to help folks prepare for this exam, I had a very good idea going into this book project for the questions people had in the areas they struggled. So I was really able to take questions from, thousands of learners and to incorporate those into how I wrote about these concepts in the book to help people prepare for the exam.
Actually, you just gave me a perfect podcast guest gift, which is the great segue into the last part of the interview, where we talk about actually how did you write the book and things like that, and how do you approach content creation generally. And believe it or not, there are people who skip in the podcast to this section because they want to learn about that. And so I was wondering, did you get into writing first, or books first, or videos first?
So it began with speaking,
okay,
and then moved into developing learning content, and then writing books, and then video content came around 2019.
Okay,
and I had done some isolated incidents, like Microsoft had their live TechNet sessions in years past, so they brought me up to Redmond, and we went into their studio, and we did a couple of all-day online sessions back in the 2010s somewhere. So I'd had some isolated experiences with video, but video really came at the end. when we got to COVID and I could no longer travel to meet folks, and they said, okay, I'm going to find a way to do this in an online context, and now I just wouldn't have it any other way. But it was really through years of delivering exam prep content, and I've done quite a bit of learning content creation for LinkedIn that's more niche. So YouTube's really my large audience work, but as I have just fielded so many questions from so many people about this exam, I felt I could write a book that was unique in all the world. There was actually a really good book written for the CISSP exam a few years ago, and it hasn't been refreshed since about 2016. And I said, I think I can do something along the lines of that book, but a little bit more thorough while still being concise at the same time. And the only way I could write a book that I felt was as thorough as it needed to be and focused on the exam concepts that I felt were important, but in the format that I thought would be best from a learner, there's not a publisher I could go to that would allow me to do exactly that. And I looked at Leanpub and saw here a platform basically in Markdown, a language that I speak every day as a security person. I love writing documentation in Markdown, so you fit right into my tool set. You gave me absolute creative control. You gave me a way to process payments, so it was no longer my problem. You gave me a way to put my book out there and to set a price that was fair and not restricted by some of the big tech platforms, jumping through the hoops to sell a book on Amazon. Amazon's a great service, not something I wanted to deal with. And you allow me to provide my book in a flexible format so people can read it on the web. They can get it in an EPUB format, but they can also get it in a PDF, which is so rare. So many platforms lock you down to where you're going to use that book in the way that we limit you with our DRM, right? And we know piracy is everywhere, so we're relying on you rely on the fact that people are good people, and piracy is going to be limited. And I sat down with my immediate social circle and my wife and said, here are the trade-offs. I think this is the right way, and I don't regret it for a moment. It's been so I can't tell you, Len, how grateful I am to Leanpub that I could just focus on writing the content in exactly the way that I knew was going to be best to connect with my learners.
Well, thanks very much for that. I mean, that's, it makes me feel very good about the work we do every day for the last, decade, trying to bring about exactly the scenario that you just described. To be straight, to just, get to the point as well, there's also money that can, you can make more money from some platforms than others. And Leanpub is one of those platforms that, pays a higher royalty rate than other things do.
And that's a great point. So what that enabled for me was to sell a book that I felt was worth far more than I'm charging for it. So for a book that's 480 pages, if you count the front and back matter, I'm selling that for $10 to $15. And you give me 80% of that, I think. And I've been kind of watching the feedback in my soft launch for the last month. And I had somebody who passed the exam this last week who reached out and said, I paid you $15 for that book. And if I'd known how much it was going to help me, I would have given you 20. Very gratifying to hear. But you all enabled that because of the level of royalties that you paid, that I could throw a $10 book out there because I wanted to give somebody a book that was worth much more at a price that just delights them. And it's only possible through a platform like yours.
Yeah, just for anyone listening who might not quite be getting the point there, that if you in the publishing world, and if you go with a conventional publisher, you typically make a much lower percentage from a sale than you do if you self-publish. And so that way you can sell a book for less than the publisher would be selling it for and make more money yourself per sale.
Yeah, absolutely. If you're selling that on one of the big tech platforms, you might make 20 or 30% if you're lucky. And having written for some of those big publishers, it's funny, I wrote a book with three of my colleagues back in, I want to say 2011 or 2012. And earlier this year, we finally hit our author advance. And our author advance was not big, but I received my first royalty statement for 27 cents.
Wow. That's if for anyone listening who thinks that sounds strange, well, welcome to the book publishing industry. There's strange things like that. Yeah, are part of the experience of being an author.
Yeah, and to just share with your readers, you've asked me to say none of this. I'm grateful for everything you all have offered, and I just wanted to take some time to get that out there. And the other thing that kind of frustrates me in this world today is support. When you're using any software product out there, you never know what you're going to get. And I had a couple of issues when I was publishing that were not deal breakers, but they were meaningful to me. And I remember there were two issues where I thought, I'm going to live with this. I'm not happy about it. And I reached out to you through your support forums, and you said, okay, hey, this is on our list. I'm not sure we're going to get to it. And in both of those cases, I was absolutely shocked that within 48 hours of both of those, you came back to me. One was you and one was one of your colleagues that came back and said, hey, we fixed that thing you told us about. So your support is fantastic. So good on you for that.
Thanks very much for sharing that. Actually, the one thing I wanted to say was actually to go into because this is where we get this, it's, we're at the end of the interview, so we get to go into the weeds for anyone interested. And so two of the problems at least were a list of figures. So a list of figures is if you've got figures in your book, which is like, say, images that are classified as a figure, you can have a list of figures, say, at the beginning of your book. So people, it'll be on a page or pages. And if there were more than 10 items in the list, the way the list was formatted was malformed, and you were the first person to notify us of that issue. And that's actually quite bad. Like, we understand that that's bad. The only reason Leanpub is what it is because, like you said about the thousands of questions from your students, you listen to what people tell you, and particularly people who are pushing a boundary that hasn't been pushed before. And I'm sure this is true in all product development of all kinds. And the other one was, this was a funny one. So we introduced the ability to have indexes basically written in Markua, so like kind of markdown for books. And you have a very long, like compared to most books, you have a very long index because it's kind of a reference book. People who are like, oh, what was the section on that? It's incredibly useful for them to have an index broken down by subject. And then this is where PDFs come in handy. There's an actual page number that you can refer to and go to, which is amazing. And anyway, you noticed that at the top of the page of an index page, there would actually be the title of the previous section of the book.
Yeah.
So say index, it would be like, part 10, chapter 5 or something like that. And that was also like, from our perspective, like of course, we're Leanpub. We would never recommend that someone not hit the publish button because of a problem like that, but that has to be fixed.
Yeah, absolutely. And so you hit on two important areas. So I developed a book with a lot of reference images in there. So I only put visuals in a book when it's meaningful, but I had a bunch of them. And so you fixed it so I could have that table of figures in the front of the book so people could get to those images faster. And then the index in the back of the book where they can look up all occurrences of any important term. And my index in the back of a Leanpub book that I wrote myself on your platform, the quality of that index is on par with anything you get from a major publisher. It gives me the ability, I've got a 2-column index, right? And I've got I've got my top level items, my sub items. I can format them as I want. That index is as nice as any index I've ever seen on a book. And I was able to do it as I was going along writing. Couldn't have been a better experience.
Yeah, well, that's very gratifying to hear. That took a lot of work to do that, and it was something we were very proud of when it came out. But that's at the same time, like, of course we're proud of it, and then we noticed something like that we hadn't noticed in testing, and it's like, oh, we didn't try an index with enough pages to kind of hit that issue. I think was probably partly what it was. But yeah, it was tricky. Yeah, that actually, since we're just in the interests of time, actually, I might as well ask you the last question that I always like to ask guests on the podcast when the guest is a Leanpub author, which is, if there was one thing, bracketing those two things, if there was one thing that had you shaking your fist at Leanpub going, damn you, Leanpub, why is this so bad? Why don't you fix this? Or if there was one amazing feature we could build for you, what would you ask us to do?
Oh, that's very easy, Len. I'm glad you mentioned that.
Okay.
The one area of the process I wish I had more control was in the formatting of my headings. So,
Right.
by virtue of the nature, every book that I write from here on out on Leanpub is probably going to be focused on exam preparation, and I need H1, H2, and H3 headings, and I have just a lack of control there in formatting the heading size. So I wish in my book theme you would give me a way to control the formatting of my headings with a little more granularity, so I could choose my font size.
Thanks very much for sharing that. I believe you've shared that with us before, and as we always say in our emails, we can confirm this has been added to our discussion queue, but unfortunately, I can't promise when it will get to the top of the stack. But I can tell you, we do very much understand the reason and the value behind that need.
Yeah, but it's not a crisis. If you bring that, I'm going to be very happy to see it, and I'll go back and I'll update the theme of my book and republish it that day, like the first hour of the first day you tell me about.
Okay.
But, you all have been just very, very gracious in making sure that my questions were answered along the way, because I came to you with those two issues, but there were certainly a number of times where I wanted to ask how to do one thing or another, because I understand Markdown fairly well, but Markua, am I pronouncing that correctly? I don't even know.
Yeah.
Markua, I would say, is probably 90% consistent with Markdown, so there were some things I had to learn. And you gave me a way to connect with other authors, so I had a couple of other fellow authors jump in and answer some of my questions. So I think the bottom line, what I want to say there is, not only did you make it financially possible for me to deliver what I wanted to deliver in a very inexpensive book that would be worth much more than I charged for it, I didn't spend almost any time at all worrying about the formatting around the content that I was developing with the big authors and with the big tech platforms. There's always hours and hours of agonizing over the formatting, and you just wiped that completely away. I couldn't be happier with the decision we made to go with Leanpub.
Well, thanks very much for that. I guess we'll end on that note. The book is CISSP, The Last Mile. I recommend it to anyone who's obviously, taking the certification, but also, like I said, if you're just interested in these subjects, it's actually a really great if you're not studying, stress-free way to learn about these things. So thank you very much, Pete, for being on the Leanpub Front Matter podcast.
My pleasure, Len. Thanks for having me.